Well, thank you, and good morning, everyone. Yes, to put this into context, this is very much a view, if you like, from a national perspective. The National Infrastructure Commission I think, is in a sense a reflection of what I often say to people, which is that there is no infrastructure without politics. And that the Commission was established less than a year ago by the government. But interestingly, one of the very first things that we were asked to look at was energy security and efficiency, with a requirement to produce something within sort of 4 or 5 months of being asked to do it. And basically what I want to just give you today is the headlines in a quarter of an hour or so of that assessment. Clearly it's an assessment made by asking a lot of people across the energy sector, from consumers to suppliers to National Grid to the energy companies and so on, about their perspectives, and trying to pull all that together and then go back to government and say, look, here is what we see as being the key drivers that need to be addressed. So moving on, let's see what we've got here. I mean, basically the headline is that our energy sector is changing fundamentally. 2/3 of our existing power stations are going to close down by 2030 as our coal, nuclear and the older gas-fired power stations reach the end of their lives. To meet the UK's legal climate change goal to cut CO2 emissions by 80% by 2050, power stations are going to have to be largely decarbonised. Complete future reliance, as in the past, on unabated industrial fossil fuel power stations is just not on. There is a near-term need to build new-term sources of power to ensure that we have electricity we need. But over the next decade or so, new and more diverse sources of electricity generation need to come on stream. That's going to have to include more renewable energy, new gas-fired plants, and potentially new nuclear capacity. But I mean, one has to say that standing here today, that's beginning already to look doubtful. Nuclear power is, however, inflexible. Nuclear plants are best run at a continuous rate, delivering a stable baseload of power rather than ramping up and down to match demand. Shift to more low-carbon technologies is going to mean more smaller power stations connected to the distribution network, for example, onshore wind, solar power, combined heat and power. Demand is going to change as new parts of our economy start to electrify, such as heat, which is really a critical aspect of this, and transport. So the Commission's central finding is that smart power should be built around 3 innovations: interconnectors, storage, and demand flexibility. Interconnection, connecting our electricity network to our continental neighbours. It's already established, but additional supplies, such as from Norway, could bring much greater benefit to us. Storage technology is accelerating rapidly. The UK could become a world leader in making use of these technologies, not through subsidy, but by ensuring that better regulation creates a level playing field between generation and storage, bringing down bills and helping to balance the system. Demand flexibility. A new generation of high-tech systems mean that consumers can save money, cut emissions without inconvenience. Government should ensure that the UK benefits by improving regulation, informing the public of its benefits, and piloting schemes on its own estate. For the smart power revolution to realise its full potential, we've got to ensure that our networks and systems keep up. That's going to require more active management of our local electricity networks. A national system operator able to keep up with an increasingly complex system and a strategic approach to upgrading our network. And as with all infrastructure, it doesn't have to mean more. Smart can mean getting more for less. But electricity demand and supply are going to have to be balanced on a second-by-second basis in order to maintain secure supply. Network needs to be resilient to unexpected events, such as a surge in demand or a power station going offline without inconveniencing consumers. In order for the network to continue operating efficiently, future requirements will demand a smarter way of controlling our generating capacity and demand. This is going to come partly from increased interconnection to overseas energy suppliers, significantly increased storage, and more flexibility of demand. So let's start with interconnectors. Interconnectors are one of the few existing technologies that can shift large volumes of electricity from where it isn't needed to where it is. They have the potential to lower prices for consumers, improve the investment case for power stations, help us meet our carbon targets at a lower cost, and improve the security of supply. They can be thought of as both additional generation capacity and power exporters. They allow electricity to be imported at times of peak demand, but it also enables us to sell electricity abroad when we have more than we need. Great Britain currently has 4 gigawatts of interconnection capacity, around 5% of our total generating capacity through 4 interconnectors, 2 to Ireland, 1 to France, and 1 to the Netherlands. But by the early 2020s, we expect to have around 11.3 gigawatts of capacity with new connections to France, Norway, Denmark, Ireland, and Belgium, and other projects are in train. So recommendation 1 is that the government should pursue additional interconnectors with other European countries where the benefits are most significant. Interconnection investment decisions should continue to sit primarily with the private sector, but there is a role for government-led diplomacy to unlock these markets, maybe more than ever now, that can offer, we'll send Boris out, that can offer potentially large benefits to UK consumers. Storage allows consumers and suppliers to take energy and store it so that it can be used when it's most needed. Electricity prices vary throughout the day and across the year. When demand is high, prices rise. Storage technology allows consumers and suppliers to buy electricity when it's cheap and use it later when it's needed. Today, our main source of storage, of course, is through pumped hydro. There is, however, an increasing range of alternative ways to store energy: chemical batteries, compressed air, supercapacitors. There is an enormous range. It's a matter of which is going to come through. Electricity has historically been very difficult and expensive to store. However, over the last decade, there has been a great deal of innovation in electricity storage technologies, driven mostly by consumer electronics like mobile phones and, of course, as we heard just now, investment in electric vehicles. This rapidly evolving environment has driven innovation and reduced cost. For example, the cost of lithium-ion batteries has decreased from more than $3,000 per kilowatt hour in 1990 to less than $200 per kilowatt hour today. Storage technology will not need subsidies to be attractive to investors. Regulation, on the other hand, will require attention. For example, storage assets today face double charging through the various government levies that are added to electricity costs. Taxes are placed on the electricity used to charge up the store, and again when the electricity is exported. The result is that barriers to the market are hindering a technology that could bring down bills, reduce the need for additional power stations, and help secure the power mix that could ensure that we hit our legally binding climate change targets. Not only can storage help reduce the impact of peak demand and provide demand for power stations at other times of the day, it also has the potential to ease constraints on our grids and allow customers to manage their own usage. It's a bit like a river with an offload to a reservoir. Storage can allow the network to siphon off electricity rather than being forced to curtail generation by putting an end, for example, by putting an end to the paying wind farms not to produce electricity, which is currently costing us £90 million a year. So the next recommendation is that, well, when I wrote this, it was DEC. Now it's the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And Ofgem are going to have to review the regulatory and legal status of storage and remove barriers to enable storage to compete fairly with generation across the various interlinked electricity markets. Network owners are going to have to be incentivized by Ofgem to use storage to improve the capacity and resilience of their networks. Thirdly, demand flexibility. Demand flexibility covers a range of activities to reduce or shift demand for electricity during peak periods. including adjusting the consumption of electrical appliances or other facilities and deploying off-grid sources of power. Deploying automated systems to reduce consumption at times of high demand and increase it at times of low demand will allow consumers to save money and cut emissions without inconvenience. In addition, demand flexibility can support the integration of low-carbon generation such as wind, solar, or nuclear. Flexibility in how we consume energy lowers the need for flexibility in supply. Demand flexibility is becoming commonplace in other countries, such as Australia and the US, where it enables them to meet up to 15% of the peak demand for electricity, but it's currently underused in the UK. In the evidence which we were given, providers of demand flexibility have stated they're unable to access the UK's electricity markets on equal terms with generators, including the capacity market. Some of the best British businesses are already making use of demand flexibility, but there is a potential for a much wider take-up. The rollout of smart meters, which now can be assumed in every home in the 2020s, the domestic market for demand flexibility could be very significant. But unless we tackle regulatory and cultural barriers, it's unlikely that the potential benefits are going to be achieved. So the UK has got to make full use of demand flexibility by improving regulation, informing the public of its benefits it can provide, and piloting business models, some of which was touched on at the end of the last session. Ofgem are going to have to press on with the reform of the regulations and commercial arrangements surrounding demand flexibility, with a focus on making participation easier, clarifying the role of aggregators, and this should be complete by next spring. The government, Ofgem and National Grid are going to have to ensure that large users and opinion formers are aware of the money-saving opportunities that demand flexibility can offer, and encourage more industries and commercial consumers to take part. Pilots focusing on business models which make demand flexibility easy and attractive to consumers have got to be established and fully evaluated. And the government again can play its part by adopting demand flexibility on its own estates. But how do we maximise the benefits of more flexible markets? The UK requires a national systems operator able to keep up with an increasingly complex system, more active management of our local networks, and a strategic approach to upgrading our network. National Grid is a privately owned company. It's the system operator for the electricity system in the UK. It's responsible for balancing the supply of electricity with demand at the national level, for example, by ensuring that power stations are on standby in case of a sudden increase in demand, and ensuring that the network operates safely, efficiently, and securely. Distribution network owners, a number of privately owned companies, own the lower voltage local electricity network, which is used to deliver electricity to consumers. Some smaller power stations, small wind farms, domestic solar panels, are connected to the distribution network, whereas large power stations are only connected to the national transmission network. Distribution network owners are responsible for connecting new sources of demand to their networks and carrying out reinforcement investment, but they do not have a responsibility for managing supply and demand on their networks. So as the system evolves with more and more smaller power stations that are less flexible, increased deployment of storage, greater interconnection, and increased use of demand flexibility, the role of the system operator will become significantly more complex. National Grid are therefore going to have to be encouraged to invest in the necessary digital infrastructure and capability to optimize the system. So again, it's recommended that the system operator must create new markets that will allow open competition for the services that it procures. Most of the potential for storage and demand flexibility is going to be embedded in local networks. However, in future, instead of simply transforming power from transmission networks to consumers, it's almost inevitable that the distribution network owners are going to be managing the power from small, directly connected generators, such as solar and wind, as well as batteries and sources of demand flexibility, with power increasingly flowing in both directions through their systems. Enabling the transition to a more actively managed local network has to be a government priority. And by spring next year, we expect government and Ofgem to consult, and set out under what time frame this transition should best take place. For example, using storage and demand flexibility can save consumers money by postponing or mitigating expensive upgrades and grid reinforcement. Future planning frameworks must enable and incentivize the adoption of these solutions. Where upgrades to our network are needed, Ofgem should continue its work in encouraging network companies to make long-term strategic decisions. Whilst this isn't going to increase the risk of stranded assets, the Commission believes that if there is a potential net gain to future consumers, then this approach may well be justified. So to conclude, more interconnectors, increased use of storage demand flexibility, smart and resilient transmission and distribution networks can help us to decarbonise, ensure resilient supply and lower cost, and put UK companies in the forefront of domestic and international energy supply systems. We feel that the UK is uniquely placed to help to lead the world in a smart power revolution. Failing to take advantage is going to be a very expensive mistake. I cannot argue sufficiently how important government's role in this. In the National Infrastructure Commission, there is a perception that we are about projects. To a large extent, I think we're not going to be about projects. We're actually going to be very much about government policy, because government policy is absolutely critical in these areas, and it influences so much of what we're talking about today. It was touched upon earlier on, the role of the mayors, the role of cities, but above that, I think we have to recognise that government is going to be absolutely critical in this. Thank you.